Before you order, the waiter said, looking at Daniel's faded jacket and worn work boots, I need to know whether you'll be able to pay tonight. For a moment, the restaurant seemed to lose its sound. Emma Brooks looked up from the menu. She was 10 years old, dressed in the blue birthday dress she had chosen 3 weeks earlier, and still young enough to believe that adults only asked questions when they truly needed an answer. Dad! Daniel turned toward her before he looked at the waiter. That choice, small enough that most people would have missed it, was the reason the woman at the next table began paying attention. Everything's fine, sweetheart, he said. It wasn't fine, but Daniel Brooks had learned that a child's heart could remember a single moment for years, and he refused to let humiliation become Emma's strongest memory of her birthday. To understand why that dinner mattered so much, you have to go back for months. That was when Emma had stopped beside the window of Bellamy's restaurant and stared at the chandeliers glowing above the dining room. It looks like a castle, she had said. Daniel had smiled. Then maybe a princess should eat there on her birthday. He had meant it as a joke. Emma had treated it as a promise. Daniel was not a man who made many promises. Not anymore. Life had taught him to be careful with them. His wife, Emily, had died 3 years earlier after a long illness, and during her final months Daniel had stepped away from a successful engineering career to care for her and raise their daughter. By the time he was ready to return, the industry had moved on. Former colleagues had new teams, new budgets, and new reasons to say they would call him back. So Daniel took whatever honest work he could find. He repaired farm equipment in a neighborhood workshop. He restored old machines for small factories. Occasionally, a consulting job came through, but never for long. The work paid the rent. It kept food on the table. It did not leave much for castles. For 4 months, Daniel saved anyway. He made coffee at home instead of buying it on the road. He repaired a broken kitchen chair rather than replacing it. He accepted, too, late-night consulting jobs after Emma had gone to sleep. Every spare bill went into an envelope in the top drawer of his desk. Emma knew about the envelope. She had helped count the money 3 times. On the evening of her birthday, Daniel parked his aging pickup truck across from Bellamy's and turned off the engine. Warm light spilled from the windows onto rain-darkened pavement. Emma looked at the entrance, then at her father. Is this really where we're eating? It is. It looks expensive. That's because it is. Her excitement faded into concern. We don't have to go in. Daniel reached across the seat and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I made you a promise, but I don't want you to worry about money. Tonight, that's my job. Your job is to turn 10. She laughed and wrapped both arms around him. Inside, Bellamy's was even more beautiful than it had looked through the glass. Candlelight flickered across polished tables. A pianist played near the windows. Conversations mixed with the soft sound of silverware and glasses. Emma stopped beneath the chandelier. It really is a castle. Daniel looked at her face and knew that every sacrifice had already been worth it. A young waiter approached. His name tag read Evan. Good evening. Do you have a reservation? Brooks, Daniel said. Table for 2. Evan checked the list. His expression was professional until he looked up and noticed Daniel's jacket. Then his eyes moved to the work boots, still marked with a thin line of machine grease Daniel had failed to scrub away. The smile did not disappear. It simply became less sincere. This way, he led them to a table near the center of the dining room. At the next table sat a woman in a navy suit, finishing dinner with a colleague. Her name was Victoria Hayes, founder of Hayes Industrial Group. She had spent the past 15 years building one of the country's most respected automation companies. But Bellamy's staff knew her mostly as the reserved customer who requested a corner table and disliked unnecessary attention. Victoria noticed Daniel pull out Emma's chair. She noticed him wait until his daughter was seated before taking his own place. The gesture reminded her of her father, a factory electrician who had owned one good suit and treated every dinner with his children as if it were a state occasion. Emma opened the menu and stared at the prices. Dad, maybe we could just get cake. We came for dinner. What if we share something? Daniel lowered the menu. Choose what you'd like. I planned for this. Her eyes settled on roasted chicken, then moved to the chocolate cake displayed near the kitchen. Can we share the cake? I was hoping you'd ask. Evan returned with 2 glasses of water. He set them down, but did not take out his order pad. "Before you order," he said, "I need to know whether you'll be able to pay tonight." Daniel thought he had misunderstood. "I am sorry." Evan lowered his voice, but not enough to make the question private. "We've had guests order meals they couldn't afford. I'm trying to prevent an uncomfortable situation." Two diners at a nearby table stopped speaking. Emma looked around, aware now that the question was not ordinary. Daniel kept his voice level. "I understand. We'll be able to pay." Evan glanced at the menu in Emma's hands. "Bellamy's is more expensive than most families expect. There are other restaurants nearby that might be more comfortable." The final word did the damage. Emma closed the menu. "Dad, we can leave." Daniel saw excitement disappearing from her face, replaced by the instinct to make herself smaller so that an adult would stop looking at her father that way. He reached across the table. "Did you do anything wrong?" he asked. She shook her head. "Neither did I." Then he looked at Evan. "We're here to celebrate my daughter's birthday. We have a reservation, and I have enough to pay. We'd like to order." Evan shifted his weight. "I'll need to speak with my manager." At the next table, Victoria placed her fork beside her plate. Her colleague leaned closer. "Should we intervene?" "Not yet," she said. "Why not?" "Because he hasn't asked to be rescued." She was watching Daniel, not Evan. She had seen executives become cruel over far smaller insults. Daniel's restraint was not weakness. It was control, and it was costing him something. The restaurant manager arrived less than a minute later. His suit was immaculate. His greeting was not. "Mr. Brooks, I understand there is a concern about payment." Daniel glanced at Emma. "The concern isn't mine." The manager gave Evan a quick look, then turned back. "We sometimes request advance payment when circumstances require it." "What circumstances?" The manager did not answer directly. "It's only a precaution." Daniel could have raised his voice. He could have demanded to know whether anyone else in the dining room had been asked to prove they belonged there. Part of him wanted to, but Emma was watching, and he remembered something Emily had once told him. Children learn what power looks like by watching what we do when someone tries to take ours away. Daniel reached into his jacket and placed the worn envelope on the table. "How much would you like me to pay in advance?" Emma touched the envelope. "That's my birthday money." "I know," he said. The manager named an amount large enough to cover 2 full meals. Daniel counted it out without hurrying. The bills were arranged by value, their folds softened by months in the envelope. Emma tried to help. "The tens go here." Daniel smiled at her. "That's right." Something changed in Evan's face. Until that moment, he had seen a worn jacket and an old envelope. Now he saw a father and daughter who had planned this evening together. The manager accepted the payment. "Thank you for understanding." That was when Victoria stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I don't think he understands," she said. "I think he is choosing not to embarrass his daughter any further." The manager turned, and recognition crossed his face. "Ms. Hayes, I didn't realize you were dining with us. That appears to be the problem. You were so interested in deciding who belonged here that you stopped noticing who was already in the room." Several guests looked down at their tables. Others watched openly now. The manager straightened his jacket. "Our policy allows us to protect the restaurant from financial loss." Victoria glanced at Daniel's envelope. "Does the policy say to select guests by the condition of their clothes?" "Of course not." Then this was not policy. It was judgment. Daniel spoke before the manager could respond. "Ms. Hayes, I appreciate what you're trying to do." Victoria looked at him. But I'd like my daughter to have her birthday dinner." His request brought the room back to the one person everyone else had nearly forgotten. Victoria turned to Emma. "Happy birthday." Emma managed a small smile. "Thank you." Victoria returned to her chair. "Then I think the best thing all of us can do is allow you to celebrate it." The manager handed the money back. "Your dinner will be complimentary." Daniel did not take it. "I don't want a free meal." "Mr. Brooks, we insist." "And I'm declining. My daughter helped me save for this dinner. I want her to see that effort can keep a promise. Charge us exactly what you would charge anyone else." The manager looked as if he wanted to argue, but Victoria gave him a slight shake of the head. He set the money back on the table. "Of course." Evan finally opened his order pad. "What would you like?" he asked. This time he looked at Emma. She reopened the menu. "The roasted chicken, please." and 1 piece of chocolate cake with 2 forks. Evan wrote it down. I'm sorry, he said. Daniel studied him for a moment. Be more careful with the next person. Evan nodded. I will. The restaurant slowly found its sound again. The pianist resumed. Conversations returned, quieter than before. Victoria's colleague leaned toward her. You know the manager will treat him well now, because you spoke. Tonight, perhaps. And tomorrow? Victoria watched Evan carry the order to the kitchen. Tomorrow depends on whether he understood why. Dinner was not perfect, but it became theirs again. Daniel and Emma shared the roasted chicken. He told her the story of the day she was born, including the part where he had driven to the wrong hospital entrance and argued with the parking machine while Emily was in labor. Emma laughed so hard she nearly dropped her fork. When the cake arrived, a single candle stood in the center. Evan had added it without being asked. He remained a few steps away while Daniel sang. Other diners joined in, not with dramatic applause, but with the slightly awkward warmth of strangers who wanted to help repair an evening they had watched go wrong. Emma closed her eyes and made a wish. Outside, rain had stopped. The city smelled of wet pavement and autumn leaves. Was it still a good birthday? Daniel asked as they walked toward the pickup. Emma thought about it. It was, even after what happened. Yes. She slipped her hand into his. Because you didn't let them make you mean. Daniel stopped. Of all the things he had tried to teach his daughter, that was not a lesson he remembered putting into words. Your mother would have liked that answer, he said. I got it from you. Across the street, Victoria stood beside a waiting car. She had delayed her departure until she saw them leave. Mr. Brooks. Daniel and Emma crossed toward her. Thank you for speaking up, he said. You had already spoken for yourself. Sometimes it matters when another person confirms what happened. Victoria understood that better than he could have known. She took a business card from her bag and handed it to him. If you ever need anything, call me. Daniel read the name and title once. Victoria Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Hayes Industrial Group. That's generous, but I'm not looking for charity. Neither am I. Her eyes moved to the worn leather portfolio beneath his arm. A mechanical drawing was visible through a gap in the zipper. What kind of work do you do? Mechanical systems. Industrial automation when I can find the contracts. Victoria's expression changed. Daniel Brooks? Yes. You worked on the Calder synchronization platform. He seemed surprised that she knew the name. A long time ago. That platform is still used in half the plants my company operates. Daniel gave a modest shrug. Then I hope it has behaved itself. For the first time that evening, Victoria laughed. Mostly. Emma tugged her father's sleeve. We should go. It's almost bedtime. Daniel put the card in his portfolio. Good night, Ms. Hayes. Good night, Mr. Brooks. Happy birthday, Emma. Victoria watched the old pickup disappear around the corner. When she entered her car, her chief operating officer was waiting on the phone. We have a serious problem at North River, he said. The final inspection is tomorrow, and the automation system won't stay synchronized. Victoria looked through the rear window, though Daniel's truck was already gone. What changed? We don't know. Software blames hardware. Hardware blames maintenance. 3 consultants have looked at it. Has anyone contacted Daniel Brooks? There was a pause. The Daniel Brooks? He left Calder years ago. Find his professional file. If his experience is relevant, call him in the morning. Do you know him? Victoria looked down at the empty place in her bag where the business card had been. I met him tonight. And you think he can fix this? I don't know, she said. That is why I want the engineers to review his work before we ask. It was a less dramatic answer than certainty. It was also the truth. By the time Victoria reached headquarters, Daniel's old project reports were waiting in the boardroom. His name had already appeared on a consultant shortlist prepared 2 weeks earlier, but no one had contacted him. A director had marked his resume with a single note, career gap. Recent experience unclear. Victoria read the note twice. Hours earlier, a waiter had judged the same man by his boots. Here, someone had done it with a resume. The language was more professional. The assumption was identical. At 7 the next morning, Daniel was making pancakes when his phone rang. Emma was at the table, drawing a crown on the paper napkin she had brought home from Bellamy's. Unknown number, Daniel said. Maybe it's the queen from the castle. Queens usually text. He answered, expecting a customer from the workshop. Mr. Brooks, this is Victoria Hayes. Daniel looked at Emma, who immediately mouthed, the Queen? He shook his head, trying not to smile. Good morning, Ms. Hayes. My engineering team reviewed your work on the Calder platform. We're dealing with a synchronization failure at our North River facility, and they believe your experience may help. Daniel lowered the heat beneath the pan. What kind of failure? Victoria described the symptoms. Calibration values rejected at irregular intervals. Emergency shutdowns. Without a consistent hardware fault, and timing errors that vanished whenever a single subsystem was tested alone. Daniel listened without interrupting. When did the whole system last run correctly? He asked. Victoria relayed the question to the engineers gathered around her. Keyboard taps came through the phone. Tuesday afternoon. What changed before the first failure? A sensor firmware update Wednesday morning. Anything physical? Victoria asked the room. At first, no one answered. Then a maintenance supervisor remembered that a pressure regulator had been replaced Tuesday night. Same model? Daniel asked. Newer model. Approved equivalent. Equivalent pressure range doesn't always mean equivalent response time. If the new regulator reacts a few milliseconds later, the sensor could be reporting correct data outside the window the controller expects. The room on Victoria's end went still. Daniel continued. That would explain why the parts pass individually and fail together. But don't change anything based on a phone call. Compare the response curve with the old specification. If the delay is there, I'll come in and help your team test the full sequence. The chief technology officer spoke now. Mr. Brooks, we have been examining this for 16 hours. Daniel heard exhaustion, but also defensiveness. Then you know far more about the system than I do, he said. I'm only suggesting a place to look. 5 minutes later, someone in the boardroom found the difference. 11 milliseconds. Too small for a person to notice. Large enough to push thousands of coordinated actions out of step. Victoria returned to the phone. How soon can you be here? Daniel checked the clock and looked at Emma. I need to take my daughter to school. After that, 40 minutes. We'll be ready. Hayes Industrial Headquarters rose above the river in steel and glass. When Daniel walked through the lobby, the old leather portfolio was under his arm, but the denim jacket had been replaced by the one blazer he kept for client meetings. His work boots remained. They were the safest shoes he owned for a production floor. Victoria came down to meet him herself. Thank you for coming. Thank your engineers. They found the timing difference. After you told them where to look. Daniel smiled. That's what consulting is. Arriving late enough to ask the obvious question. Upstairs, 3 engineering groups stood around separate tables. Software engineers had filled one wall with code traces. The hardware team guarded stacks of test reports. Maintenance staff waited near the door, looking as though they expected to be blamed. The technology officer introduced himself as Marcus Lee. We installed a temporary timing adjustment, Marcus said. The lines are operating, but we don't trust the correction. Government inspectors arrive at 8 tomorrow morning. Then let's not waste time pretending I can solve it alone, Daniel said. I need one person from each team at the same table. No one moved at first. Daniel pulled 4 chairs together himself. Software. What does the system believe is happening? A programmer named Priya opened her laptop. The controller sees pressure instability and rejects calibration. Hardware. What do the instruments say? Marcus pointed to the report. Pressure is stable within tolerance. Maintenance. What did you see when the regulator was replaced? A young supervisor named Luis looked uncertain. The old unit was sticking. The replacement passed every static test. Then all 3 teams may be right. Marcus frowned. They can't all be right. Their conclusions contradict one another. Their conclusions do. Their observations don't. Daniel placed the reports side by side. The hardware team measured what the regulator does. Software recorded when the signal arrives. Maintenance confirmed that the new unit reaches the correct pressure. We don't have 3 competing failures. We have one conversation in which every speaker is using a different clock. For the next 2 hours, Daniel did more listening than talking. He asked Priya to display raw timestamps instead of filtered alerts. He asked Luis to explain the replacement procedure from memory. He asked Marcus to map every subsystem that depended on the pressure reading. At one point, Marcus cut off the maintenance supervisor. We already checked that. Daniel held up a hand. You checked the report. I'd like to hear what he saw. Luis described a brief vibration during startup, something he had omitted because the new regulator stabilized within seconds. That detail led Priya to a second timing assumption embedded in an older control module. The temporary correction fixed the main sequence, but under heavy load, the older module would still drift. Would the inspectors trigger that load? Victoria asked. Marcus studied the test plan. In the final stress cycle, without Luis's observation, the system would have passed the first tests and failed at the end. No one blamed him for leaving the vibration out of his report. Daniel simply asked that it be added to the model. By early afternoon, the team had built a new synchronization profile using the actual response curve of the replacement regulator. They ran the simulation once. It failed. The room tightened. Daniel looked at the data. Good. Marcus stared at him. Good. A clean failure tells us more than an unstable success. The correction is doing exactly what we asked, which means we asked the wrong thing. They adjusted the sequence and ran it again. This time, the first production line turned green, then the second, then the third. Under maximum load, every signal arrived inside its required window. No hidden drift. No emergency shutdown. System stable appeared on the central display. The room exhaled. Priya hugged Luis before realizing what she had done. Marcus laughed and shook Daniel's hand. You saved the inspection. Daniel looked around the table. Luis saved it when he mentioned the vibration. Priya found the old timing assumption. You mapped the dependencies. I asked questions. Questions no one else asked. Because I wasn't here long enough to inherit your assumptions. Victoria had watched leaders take credit for less. Daniel was doing the opposite. Not performing humility, but returning each part of the solution to the person who had found it. Can we run the complete inspection cycle? She asked. Marcus nodded. It will take 3 hours. Daniel checked his watch. It was 2:45. I need to leave at 3:15. Marcus looked at the stable display. Now, I pick up my daughter at 3:30. The room waited for Victoria's response. She remembered Emma in her blue dress, watching her father count bills from a worn envelope. Go, she said. We have the model, the procedure, and the people who built the solution. They can finish the test. Daniel gathered his notes. Call me if the load cycle drifts by more than 2 milliseconds. Marcus smiled. Not 11. Let's try not to make a habit of 11. At 3:28, Daniel's pickup stopped outside Emma's school. She climbed in and held up the paper crown from breakfast. How was work? She asked. We fixed a machine. A big one. Pretty big. Did the Queen help? Daniel started the engine. The Queen has engineers. Are they smart? Very. They just needed to listen to one another. Emma placed the crown on his head. Maybe you're the Queen. Daniel laughed all the way out of the parking lot. At Bellamy's, the manager spent that same afternoon reviewing the previous night with Evan. There had been no complaint from Victoria. No threat from Daniel. No public scandal forcing the conversation. Evan requested it himself. I was wrong, he said. Mr. Brooks had a reservation. He was polite. I decided he would be a problem before he did anything. The manager sat across from him in the empty dining room. I approved the advance payment because I brought you my assumption and you treated it like evidence. Neither man enjoyed hearing the truth stated so plainly. They reviewed the restaurant's policy. It allowed advance payment only after an actual payment issue or for certain prearranged events. Nothing authorized what they had done. The manager wrote a letter to Daniel and Emma. Evan added a note of his own. It did not say, "We are sorry if you were offended." It said, "We judged you by your appearance. We embarrassed you in a place where you should have been welcomed." That was wrong. The letter arrived before any news about North River, before anyone at Bellamy's knew Daniel had entered Hayes' industrial headquarters, and before his name meant anything to them beyond the father they had failed the night before. Daniel read it at the kitchen table. Emma watched him. Are you still mad? I was hurt more than angry. Are we going back? Not unless you want to. She considered this with the seriousness of someone making an important decision. Maybe someday. I still like the cake. Daniel folded the letter and placed it beside Victoria's business card. Someday, he agreed. The North River system passed every inspection the following morning. There were no crowds waiting to celebrate Daniel. No reporters outside his workshop. The result appeared where most good work appears, in a technical report beneath the names of everyone who had contributed. Victoria made sure Daniel's name was among them. Then she asked him to return to headquarters. In her office, she placed a folder on the table between them. "This is an employment offer," she said. "Director of Systems Integration." Daniel did not open it immediately. "Why me?" "Because you understand automation. A number of people in that building understand automation. Then because you made 3 groups stop defending themselves long enough to solve a shared problem." Daniel looked through the glass wall toward the engineering floor. "They solved it." "Yes, and that is exactly why I want you to lead them." He opened the folder. The salary would change his and Emma's life. For the first time in years, he would not need to calculate which bill could wait until the next contract. Still, he closed it after the second page. "I have conditions." Victoria leaned back. "I expected you might. I leave in time to pick up my daughter from school." "Agreed. I attend parent meetings, school concerts, science fairs, and birthdays." "Agreed. And no one marked a resume career gap, as if caring for a family means a person stopped growing." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "That one may take more work. Then it matters most." She extended her hand. "Agreed." Daniel shook it. He did not accept because Victoria had rescued him at a restaurant. He accepted because she had listened when he described the life he refused to sacrifice. And Victoria did not hire him because she felt sorry for him. She hired him because when a system failed, he saw people before he saw blame. Several weeks later, Emma asked to return to Bellamy's. "Are you sure?" Daniel said, "I want cake. And I want to see if Evan remembered." They arrived in the same pickup truck. Daniel wore the same denim jacket. Emma had insisted on the blue birthday dress, even though it was no longer her birthday. Evan was near the entrance when they walked in. For half a second, surprise stopped him. Then he approached. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks." "Emma." He looked at both of them, not at the jacket, not at the boots. "Welcome back." The manager came forward, but Daniel raised a hand. "We received your letter. I meant every word." "I know. That's why we're here." They were shown to the same table, not as a symbol and not for an audience. It was simply the table Emma chose. Evan gave the menus. "May I bring you anything to start?" Emma smiled. "Chocolate cake." Daniel looked at her. "Before dinner?" "It's not my birthday. There are no rules." Evan tried not to laugh. "1 slice or 2? "1 slice," she said, "and 3 forks." She pointed to the empty chair. "You should have some with us when you get a break." Evan blinked. "I like that." Nothing dramatic happened that evening. No one recognized Daniel. No executives arrived. There was no announcement and no applause. That was what made it matter. The apology had not erased the first dinner. Forgiveness did not mean pretending it had never happened. It meant allowing what happened next to be different. When Evan took his break, he sat with them for 5 minutes and shared the cake. He told Emma that after their birthday dinner, the restaurant had changed its training. Staff were now taught that concern required evidence, and that a guest's clothes were never evidence. "So you remembered," Emma said. "I did." Daniel lifted his fork. Then the lesson was worth more than the cake. Emma tasted another bite. Let's not exaggerate. Months passed. At Hayes Industrial, Daniel became known less for having the fastest answer than for asking the question that made other people think differently. Meetings changed. Maintenance technicians were invited before designs were finalized. Junior engineers presented findings without being interrupted. Candidates returning from caregiving leave were evaluated on what they could do, not only on how recently they had done it. Not every change worked immediately. Real transformation rarely does. But when an old habit returned, someone in the room would ask, "Are we looking at evidence, or are we protecting an assumption?" The question spread. Daniel still left at 3:15. One Thursday, a senior executive scheduled a mandatory meeting for 4 o'clock. Daniel declined it. By Friday, the meeting had moved to 2. A month later, The same executive began leaving early on Wednesdays to coach his son's football team. Victoria noticed these things. She did not put them in a company announcement. She simply stopped confusing constant availability with commitment. At the end of the school year, Emma performed in her first choir concert. Daniel sat in the front row. Victoria sat 2 seats away, holding a small bouquet Emma had personally requested she bring. Before the curtain opened, Emma peeked from backstage and spotted her father. She pointed her wrist, pretending to check a watch. Daniel pointed to his own and mouthed, 3:15. She grinned. The children walked onto the stage. Their first notes were uncertain. Then they found one another, voice by voice, until the song became something no child could have created alone. Victoria leaned toward Daniel. Synchronization, she whispered. Daniel smiled. The best kind. After the concert, Emma ran toward them. Did you hear me? Every note, Daniel said. Even when everyone else was singing, he knelt so they were eye to eye. Especially then. She hugged him, nearly crushing the flowers between them. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Daniel found the old birthday envelope in his desk. Inside were $3 and a receipt from Bellamy's. He thought about how close he had come to leaving that restaurant. He thought about the waiter who had judged him, the woman who had witnessed it, and the daughter who had watched him choose what kind of man he would be. The new job had given him stability. It had not given him dignity. He had carried that into the restaurant himself. Victoria's influence had opened a door. It had not created his ability. Years of work had done that. And Evan's apology had not become meaningful because Daniel later proved important. It mattered because Evan offered it when Daniel was still, in his eyes, an ordinary father in a worn jacket. That was the truth people often missed. Respect is not a prize we give someone after discovering their resume, their wealth, or their usefulness. It belongs at the beginning, before the introduction, before the achievement, before we know whether the stranger in front of us can ever do anything for us. Daniel placed the receipt back inside the envelope and closed the drawer. From the hallway, Emma called, Dad. Yes. You'll be here in the morning, right? He turned off the light. I promise. There were promises life had made impossible for him to keep. There were others that had required sacrifice, patience, and help he had never expected. But this one he could keep. And to the little girl waiting down the hall, that mattered more than every title, every contract, and every room that had finally learned his name. Because Daniel Brooks had never needed the world to discover that he was extraordinary. He only needed his daughter to know she could count on him.